Barrier 10, volunteers and paid staff. What different ways do organisations define their volunteers in relation to this barrier?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is cheap labour. Okay. They sometimes also treat them as unpaid employees. They have exactly the same expectations of them as their paid employees, but the volunteers, of course, get no salary check at the end of it. Another one is that they also overvalue their volunteers. It's a process called sanctification. They idealise volunteers. They're wonderful, they're amazing, they're heroic, etc. Which somehow seems to me to let them off the hook of managing them and providing them with decent working conditions. So here are these saintly characters who can get on with it. And I mean, there are some marvellous volunteers, but if we start treating them as saints, I think we do them a disservice. The Volunteer in England introduced another concept which I liked, which is parity of esteem. So volunteers are providing services of equal value, but it's part-time and it's often providing extras rather than saying that the paid staff are doing full-time. So I think that's a lovely way of thinking of volunteers. They're not inferior, they're not saintly superiors, but parity of esteem, that seems a lovely sort of tone of relationship to aim at. And I think often volunteers will go through their induction period, and within the first few days, I think, will work out how the agency defines them. These aren't formal definitions, of course, but they will pick up on how they're really regarded.
And what sort of things can happen if this barrier isn't addressed?
Well, I think it's the core retention issue, isn't it? If you're not given adequate status as a volunteer, I mean, why would you hang around? If you're a volunteer who's given all the mucky jobs that the staff don't want to do or don't care to do that day, and you're expected to take more responsibility than you signed up for because the paid staff wants an easy afternoon, well, I don't think you're going to stay around, are you?
What about the workers' perception of volunteers in certain circumstances?
Well, I think this relationship is what I call one of creative tension. I think paid staff may in principle approve the notion of volunteering, but in these troubled times one of the problems is they fear for their jobs. And that's maybe quite a reasonable anxiety. I don't think ever that volunteers can simplistically replace paid staff, but that's an anxiety that many paid staff will have at the moment. I think also they wonder, can we trust volunteers with vital policies like acceptance, equal opportunities and confidentiality? So there's that anxiety. There's another one. I think some paid staff now think that volunteers have more time or more quality time or more fun time with the clients than they, the paid staff, do. So there's sort of resentment on those grounds. From the volunteers' angle, I think, they sometimes think, well, we're doing the same job as them, sometimes we're standing in for them and covering their backs, but we only get expenses. So I think there are a series of tensions that need to be sort of re-examined and opened up and periodically explored. So hopefully things will go well with the two groups, but there will often be those sorts of niggles that can get in the way, I think.
So you can have a healthy relationship or an unhealthy relationship, but that also can change over time. Yeah?
Well, yes, I think in induction, I think there need to be meetings of the volunteers with existing paid staff, and some paid staff meetings should involve volunteers, so you feel that you're part of a team. But it's much easier said than done, isn't it?
Yeah, very true. I like the idea of, because volunteers are part of the workforce, in inverted commas, so they need to be...
And there may be many more volunteers than there are paid staff. Often you might have half a dozen paid staff, or one paid worker, and 20 or 30 volunteers, so they've got to get on well, and there's got to be mutual respect. And there's often tension between the first paid worker. I think this is always a delicate one. The first paid worker comes in, and I know that some volunteer teams say, well, we'll take a look at her, but if she doesn't suit, we're off. So there's preparedness, I think. And so the incoming paid worker needs to be quite gentle and easygoing and spend their first month, I would think, listening and not saying anything. I've heard of paid workers coming in and instantly changing. One example in Herne Bay was the Saturday boot sale or garage sale, which had been bringing in solid sums of money for years. They decided on arrival that it didn't suit the image of the agency and it wasn't to be continued. So she pulled the plug without even consulting the senior volunteer concerned. So the senior volunteer said, well, that's it, I'm off. A number of volunteers went with her. And then about a month later, that agency was advertising for volunteers because they'd all jumped ship. So getting in teamwork situations with long-standing volunteers when you arrive is very delicate. I think when the first paid worker arrives in an all-volunteer agency, everybody needs to be on their best behaviour, and the paid worker needs to listen more than talk, I think. And then when the second, third and fourth paid worker arrive, it is still a single paid worker in the agency. I think the problem for each new paid worker is the previous paid worker. They're stepping into somebody's shoes, whether they've made a mess of the situation or they've been absolutely marvellous. They're following in somebody's history, so they need to be aware of that and sort of tiptoe into the job, I think. I also hear of people coming in and saying, we'll show them who's boss, and I think, oh my God, I don't think bosses in that sense go down too well with volunteers. So please don't try to be a boss. I always think if you have to show who's boss, you've lost it already.